Welcome back. Welcome to this section where we would start developing the to-do management application. Until now, we focused on the counter example. We used the counter example to understand the basics of components, JSX, state, and props. With the to-do management application, the idea is to keep focusing on the components part along with adding in new features. We'll add routing to the application. How do you navigate from one page to another page? When you start from a login page and you click a button, you would want to go to the welcome page. How do you do that? How do you go from welcome to to-dos page? How do you implement forms and validation with React? How do you call REST APIs? And over the long term, we'll also look at authentication. How do you implement authentication in the backend, as well as how do you actually store the authentication tokens in the front end and use them when you make your REST API calls. I'm excited to bring this section to you where we would start with the basics of the to-do management application. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, bye-bye. Welcome back. Let's get started with the to-do management application. The first two components we would start with are the login component and the welcome component. Our initial objective is to create a login form with the name and the password, and to be able to have the user click login and show the welcome page. That's basically the objective for the initial few steps. In this step, let's start focusing on the login component. I'll go to the favorite IDE, Visual Studio Code, and what we'll do is we will reuse the project that we created earlier. So for now, what we'll do is we'll actually create a new folder inside components. So I'll call this to do. So all the to-do management application components we would be storing in the components to do folder. Let's go to the app.js and let's start with creating the to-do app. So in the app, what I'll do is, until now we have been including the counter. So I'll actually comment this out. How do I comment this out? Okay, this is JSX, right? So you need to use the complex way of commenting. So I need to put it in typical multi-line comment and enclose, make this a JavaScript code. So this is what you need to do. So open brace and within the comment, close brace. If I go to the browser, you don't really see anything right now. What we want to do is we would want to start creating our to-do app in here. So I'll create a component called to-do app. The to-do app is not yet ready, so it might error out. So let's go to the to-do and say new file, to-do app.jsx. And over here, let's start with the imports. So import React and component from React. Once we do that, we can actually create the to-do app class. To-do app extends component, and let's create the render method. So in the render method, what do we want to do? We would want to return something back. What do we want to return back? For now, let's just return a simple div. Class name is equal to to-do app. Inside this, I'll just say my to-do application. Cool. So we are creating a component. Will it work as it is? Think. Will it work as it is? You need to do export default to-do app. Now, the to-do app can be used in here. Will it work? Not yet, right? We need to import it. So I'll go ahead and import it. So import to-do app from dot slash components slash counter slash, not counter, to-do slash to-do app. Isn't that easy? Cool. My to-do application is now shown on the browser. Let's go to the to-do app.jsx. What we'll do in this particular component is we'll create all the components related to the to-do app initially in this single file. once we think they are stabilized, we will move them to their own files. So we want to start with the login component. So let's start with the login page. So login component, class login component extends component, and let's create the render method quickly. So what do we want in the login page? We would want a couple of buttons, actually a couple of form elements, couple of text boxes, name and password, and we want a login button, right? So let's create them right now. So can I say input type is equal to text, and say name is equal to username. This is the username, and after that enter the password. Input type is equal to text, name is equal to password. Is it text? Is it text? It should be password. So this is actually typical HTML, nothing special about it. What we are creating in here are the basic elements. So we are creating React elements for input, and what we want to do after that is we would want to have a button. So button, and let's call this login. So what we have now is a text box for username, a password field, and a login button. Will this work? Do you think this would work? The answer is no, because we need to actually put it within a div. In a JSX, you cannot return multiple elements back. You have to actually put them in a div, or actually I could have used a React fragment. This is called React fragment. It's basically an empty tag. You can do that, or as we do usually, we'll put a div around it. Now if I go to my to-do application, it still shows my to-do application. Why? Because we have not used the login component yet in here. So I'll remove my to-do application and put login component in here. Let's see if this comes up. Cool. So username, password, and login. That's awesome. One of the things that you can see is the login button is now appearing in a bigger font because of the CSS that we have defined elsewhere. Let's not worry about it right now. For now, you'll be able to enter values in here and click login, and we'll be able to use this login component. In this quick step, we started creating the login component. We did the setup for the to-do app. We created a module for to-do app where we are now having all the code and the components related to to-do app in this specific module. We created the login component, and we are now all set to go ahead and implement the login page. I'll see you in the next step where we will talk about this a little more. Until then, bye-bye. Welcome back. In the previous step, we implemented the login component with a username and a password and the login. We did not really implement a lot of functionality in there. In this step, let's focus on making this login page a little bit more functional. So I'm right now able to enter values in the username and password. And let's say I would want to give a default value to the username. So let's say I would say input name is this value is equal to all small in 28 minutes. So we would use this as the user ID for a major part in this course. It would be all small in 28 minutes. And let's save this. And now in 28 minutes is the user ID. But one of the things you'd see is as soon as I assign the value, I'm not really able to edit this specific field. And if I do a right click, inspect, it says failed prop type. You provided a value prop to a form field without an on change handler. This will render a read only field. If the field should be mutable, use default value. Let's take a step back and think a little bit more about this. When I change the value of a password in here, what is happening is I'm changing the value of this password HTML element. Where is this value being stored? This value is being stored as part of the HTML form. In HTML, all the form elements typically maintain their own state. So this password element or any other element we add to a form maintains its own state, and it is updated directly based on user's input. As I change something in here, the state of this specific thing gets updated. However, when it comes to React, we would want to hold the state inside this specific component. So for example, we would want to hold the values of username and password as state inside the login component. So there are two possibilities which are present in here. Either the form is the source of truth for the password value, or use the state of the component as the source of truth. What React recommends to do is to combine these two and have a single source of truth. Is it difficult to understand all this theory? Let's get hands-on right now. So what React recommends to do is to have a state inside the login component for these two things. So I have a form, so I'll have the corresponding state in the login component. So we'll say constructor. Until now we were doing this constructor, and over here we call super. The best practice is also to accept props and pass props to the superclass. This would ensure that any properties are passed on to the superclass constructor. Now coming to the state, how do we set up the state? This dot state is equal to, what should be the state? Username colon, I'll have the initial value as in 28 minutes, and password. So what I'm doing is creating an initial state in here. Now how can I tie this state to this form element? The way I can tie the state to the form element is by saying value, not as in 28 minutes, but saying this dot state dot username. This is a JavaScript variable, so we need to put it within curly braces. Now let's see what would happen in 28 minutes. I'm still unable to edit it, that's okay. So what is happening now? Whatever is present in this state is being picked up and shown as the value. So what is the source of truth right now? It's this state. But when the value changes, what do we need to do? We need to update this state. How do we do that? Before we do that, let's actually add the value to the password field as well. So this dot state dot password. What we want to do is, when a value of username changes, we want to update this state. How do we do that? On change is equal to this dot handle username change. So I would want to create a method called handle username change. I said it's handler. Actually, I would want it to be handle username change. Let's go ahead and create that handle username change. And one of the things is this handle username change gets something called a event as an input. So if you talk in terms of HTML, any action that you perform in the button, when you do a click on it, you generate a click event. In React terms, actually this is something called a synthetic event. We'll look at what's in it very soon. So I'll say console.log event. The last thing which we need to do is to bind this event. So this dot is equal to this dot bind this. So now the event is bound. Let's see what would happen on the form. Once we add the on change on the username, the error on the username field will disappear, but you would still see the error on the password field. That's fine. We'll fix that a little later. But one of the things you would see is, even though I'm trying to update the value in here, I would see that events are being generated. The synthetic event is being printed in here. However, you would see that the value of the username is not getting updated. Why is it not getting updated? Because that value is coming from the state, and we have not really updated the state of the thing yet. So let's just say event.target.value, console.log event.target.value gives the value which is being changed. So if I try to change right now, you can see whatever value I'm typing in, that value comes up in here. What we would need to do is actually use that and set this state. How do we update the state? This dot set state and to the set state we need to pass a object containing the new value for username. So username, you'd want to set it to event.target.value. So this can be written in a shorter way by removing all this space in this specific way. So you would see code like this and get confused with the syntax. Actually, this code is very similar to the formatted version that we saw a little earlier. So this dot set username to this. So what we are doing is whenever username value changes, we are updating this state. Let's see what would happen now. Oops, you can see that we are able to update the username, and now the username field is a controlled field. What is a controlled field? A controlled component at a larger picture is something in which the entire change in the UI is dictated by this state. So whenever some change happens, state is updated. Whenever state is updated, the view is updated back. So this specific thing is called a controlled component. The source of truth is the state inside the React component. Now let's quickly do the same changes on the password field as well. You can pause the video in here and try it as an exercise. Okay, let's go ahead. So on change is equal to this dot handle password change. So I'll say handle username change and handle password change, and let's bind it as well. Let's see. Cool. It's only printing the new element because I'm setting it in username. Actually, I should set it to password. So I need to update the state of password, right? Let's see what would be printed. Yep, cool. Whatever I'm typing in here is now being printed. We have not still yet implemented the login, but one of the things that we did right now is whenever you update this username or the password, it's getting updated into this state. So this complete component that we have, login component, is now a controlled component because everything is now dictated by the state which is inside the login component. Whenever you make a change in here, state is updated. When the state is updated, the change is reflected back in the element. In this step, we made the login component a controlled component. We added state to this specific component, and whenever there's a change in the username, we added an event to handle that. And we are now able to update the state whenever somebody types in something. And we also tied back the value of the element to the state as well. I'll see you in the next step where we'll be talking about a lot more things. Until then, bye-bye. Welcome back. One of the things that you would have observed in the previous step is we had to create two change events for handling the changes in the two elements which are present in here. What if the form has 10 elements, 15 elements? You can't keep writing events like this, right? So what can we do in that kind of scenarios? That's what we would be looking at in this specific step. Handle username change event. It is right now printing event.target.value. Let's see what would happen if I say event.target.name. Let's try and change the value. So you can see that it's printing username, which is the name of the field which is changing. So what I can do is actually, instead of hard coding username in here, what I can do is instead of username, I can say this specific thing. So let's format this so that this looks a little more readable. So we are creating an object with username as a specific value and setting it into the state. This value is actually event.target.name, right? So that will help us to make it generic. Will this work? If I save this right now, you can see compilation errors. That is because whenever we create an object, so what we are doing in here within the curly braces is creating an object. Whenever we are creating an object, the left hand side is the name of the object member variable, and that is typically expected to be a constant value. You cannot put a variable in there. If I want to use a variable in there, what I would need to do is put it within square brackets. So now let's see what would happen. Cool. Now you can see that the state is being updated and it is being reflected back in here. That's cool. So what we can do now is, instead of actually calling this handle username change event, what I'll do is I'll just copy this and call this handle change. So for any change of event, what we want to do is call this. The thing is, it can work both with username and the password fields, because here we are not hard coding the name of the element in this state which is changing. One of the important things now is whatever you have in the state should match with whatever we have in the form element names. So the name of this form element is username. So in state also we should use username. Same with password as well. So this creating a generic handle change will only work when I have the same names for form elements as well as inside this state. Now let's go ahead and do this. So now I can actually comment out control/handle password change, can comment out handle username change as well, and I can remove the binding for these and add the binding for this dot handle change is equal to this dot handle change dot bind this. Now this would enable us to have multiple form elements and still have just one method for the handle change. Now we need to tie it back to the change. So it's handle change. Handle change. Let's see what would happen now. Cool. So whatever I'm typing in is going into the state and shown down here. If you want to see what's in the state, actually just before the thing, you can say this dot state. So this prints the state before the handle change event. So you can see the state is getting updated as well as we keep typing in stuff. Cool. So in this step, what we looked at is how to create a generic event to handle the changes. We created a generic event which can handle all changes for any text element. I'll see you in the next step. Until then, bye-bye.